News from the Middle East over the weekend has been dominated by those reports of 3 U.S. troops killed in Jordan and dozens more injured, and also by the revelations that some staff of UNRWA, that's the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestinian Refugees, that they were, it appears, complicit in the attacks of October 7th. I'm joined by Lara Marlowe, who's covered events in the Middle East over the years. Lara, good morning.
Good morning, Pat.
Now, what do you make, first of all, of the attack on the U.S. troops in Jordan? It would seem to be, maybe on the face of it, a deliberate provocation to try to draw the U.S. into a retaliation.
Yes, that's right. The White House is saying that it was done by an Iranian-backed militia. It's not clear whether it was one of the militias based in Syria or based in Iraq. This is what the Iranians call the axis of resistance. It's a network all across the region of groups. Well, I call them the three H's: Hamas, Hezbollah, and Houthis, which all receive funding and weapons from the Islamic Republic of Iran. Now, neither Iran nor the U.S. wants an outright confrontation between the two countries, but they have this sort of tit-for-tat war going on. The U.S. has assassinated at least two leaders of these groups in Syria and in Iraq recently, and this is one of dozens of attacks on U.S. targets in Iraq recently. It's the first one actually in Jordan, but it's the first one that has claimed U.S. fatalities. And Joe Biden has promised to retaliate for this.
Now, Joe Biden, he's under pressure, obviously, from the Republicans who would like him, well, they want to brand him, Trump does anyway, as a coward and, you know, someone who's ineffectual and hasn't intervened and hasn't shown the power of deterrence of the United States, and therefore this has happened. The Iranians very quick to say, not us, we did not orchestrate this attack. We may have supplied the weapons, which is, by the way, they supply weapons, obviously, to many of these militias, but it wasn't us.
Yeah, well, this network of militias gives them the privilege of deniability. That's obvious, but they are pleased about it, obviously. So this could be a very dangerous escalation. It could just pass, but it's part of this mounting regionalized war that goes all the way from the Indian subcontinent to the Mediterranean Sea. I mean, the whole Middle East is literally going up in flames, and the U.S. is playing the role of pyromaniac firemen. You know, at the same time, pumping billions and billions of dollars worth of weapons into Israel to be used in Gaza, and sending the head of the CIA to Paris this weekend to negotiate via Egypt and Qatar to negotiate with Hamas. So it's an extremely dangerous situation.
So that business of the U.S. as both pyromaniac and as fireman, supplying the means to set the fires alight ablaze across the Middle East, and then meantime on the diplomatic front trying to stay Netanyahu's hand in some way, which is a hand that does not want to be stayed.
It certainly doesn't. There was a meeting last night of settlers groups in Israel, and there were a dozen cabinet ministers, including two very extreme right-wing ones, Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich, where they called for the recolonization of the Gaza Strip, and they said, we want to go home. These places are only safe if there are settlers in them. And these far right-wing cabinet ministers call for the complete expulsion of all Palestinians, not only from Israel, but from the occupied territories, from the West Bank and from the Gaza Strip.
Yeah. Now, that's not going to happen, we know. And also...
if Donald Trump is elected, Pat, it could, I'm afraid.
Well, the question is, you want to expel Palestinians from Gaza, who's going to take them?
Egypt.
Egypt does not want to take them.
Egypt doesn't want them, but Egypt desperately needs billions and billions of dollars. And there's a feeling among diplomats that the U.S. or Israel could perhaps money talks, and that they could persuade the Egyptians to let the Palestinians into the Sinai Peninsula in exchange for a huge amount of money. I mean, it hasn't happened yet, but there's certainly a lot of speculation that this could happen. And the other thing is, now they've got most of the 2.3 million Palestinians of the Gaza Strip have been squeezed into a tiny little pocket in the south west of the Gaza Strip next to the Mediterranean. So they're backed up between the Egyptian border, between this high fence that the Egyptians have built, and the Mediterranean Sea. And they're still being bombed. And the only place for them to go is into the sea or into Egypt. And if it goes on like this, at some point they could break through the border. What's going to happen? It's every catastrophe scenario is plausible at this point.
Now, meantime, the accusations by the Israelis that some members of UNRWA were involved in the atrocities of October 7th, and they must have produced chapter and verse because a number of countries have said we're pausing our aid to the relief agency because of that complicit act.
Well, number one, I would really like to see the evidence. I don't think the Israelis have any credibility whatsoever in this sort of thing. Remember, these are the people who killed 3 of their own hostages, 3 Israeli citizens who were shirtless and waving a white flag. These are the people who tell Palestinians to go to so-called safe zones and then bomb them in zones which they said would be safe. I really don't think they have a lot of credibility. They are belligerent, the chief belligerent in this conflict. And we haven't seen the evidence. Even, they showed allegedly the dossier to the New York Times, and all it contains more than what we've already been told is that, well, one of them was a school teacher, one of them kidnapped a woman, one of them, it's just allegations, it's just accusations. It may be true, Pat. I'm not saying it's not,
I was going to say that it actually mightn't be surprising, given the number of workers that UNRWA has in the Gaza Strip distributing aid, the number of workers who may have been affected over the years by attacks by Israel and so on, that some of them would not have been radicalized and some of them would not have been in Hamas. That's highly unlikely. It's highly unlikely. Yeah. There's bound to be a few.
It's a fact that Hamas is very deeply integrated into Palestinian society. It's not like they live separately, out on military bases or something. They are part of the society. Remember that 150 UN employees have been killed in the Gaza Strip since October 7th. And these 12 people, if indeed they were complicit with Hamas, are less than 0.01% of the 13,000 UNRWA employees in the Gaza Strip. And it's going to be absolutely catastrophic if UNRWA can no longer function, because this is the lifeline to the Palestinians.
Is this the timing of this? Is this likely to be Israel deciding to wait until the Court of Justice made its interim ruling and then they produce this?
Well, that is very suspicious because on Friday, the International Court of Justice said that Israel must avoid genocidal acts, and they also said Israel must allow more humanitarian aid into Gaza, and the majority of that aid was brought in by UNRWA. So it was almost like Israel responding to the ICJ by saying, okay, you want us to let more aid in, we'll shut down the aid agency. And it's very unfortunate that 8 countries and huge donors, the US, Germany, Britain, have cut off all aid to UNRWA. Together, they provide 70% of UNRWA's funding, and UNRWA has no financial reserves. So this means that even more people are going to die. It's already, the figure on Saturday was 26,422 dead in the Gaza Strip, of whom 11,500 children. And it's interesting that Israel no longer contests these figures that are coming from the Hamas Health Ministry.
It's a very depressing situation. One of my listeners wanting to know, why were the U.S. troops in Jordan anyway?
Well, I mean, the U.S. has I think it's 180 something bases all over the world. They're in places you would never suspect. But remember, they had up to 170,000 in Iraq at one point during the US occupation. They left Iraq in 2011, and then they had to go back a few years later to fight ISIS. And these troops in Jordan were in a sort of reconnaissance observation post right up in the corner between Jordan, Iraq, and Syria. And they've been helping Syrian opposition against Assad in Syria. There's still 2,500 U.S. troops in Iraq, by the way, and the U.S. is now talking about withdrawing them because they're getting attacked by pro-Iranian militias all the time. And Lloyd Austin, the U.S. Secretary for Defense, is the man who organized the big withdrawal in 2011, and he may have to withdraw these 2,500 as well.
Now, the big question, the future of Israel, I suppose, they would like to consolidate their borders to try and eliminate the enemy within, as they would have it. But if America was to, stop supporting Israel, how long would Israel have before it would be overwhelmed? I mean, this is a country that got UN sanction at its founding, and America seems to be doing the UN's job, if you like, of trying to keep the creation of the state of Israel in place.
I think there's no question that Israel would not have survived until now without unconditional support by the United States of America. They have received, since the Second World War, $124 billion that's just military aid alone. Could they survive without the U.S.? I don't know. I mean, they certainly would say that they could, and the extreme right wing, the settler lobby, would probably tell the U.S. to go jump in a lake if they said they were withdrawing support. But that's just not in the cards. I mean, I wrote a sort of provocative piece that was in the Irish Times of the weekend saying that Joe Biden should talk tough to Netanyahu and tell him we're going to withdraw your money. But it's just inconceivable. The U.S. will not do it. It's very, very hard to imagine. Although politically now, and it's quite surprising because this was never the case before, there is a much, much stronger critical movement, especially among young people who do not want their tax dollars being spent to kill Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. And this could lose the election for Joe Biden.
And Trump, meanwhile, predicting World War III over the weekend on foot of the killing of 3 American troops. The end game here, Lara, I mean, we looked at Ukraine and Russia, and we thought the war would be a matter of months, perhaps not going on 2 years and beyond. How long is this particular war between Palestinians, Hamas particularly, and Israel likely to persist?
A long time, a very long time.
I mean, I'm not talking about the overall conflict, which may go on for generations. I'm talking about
the bombardment of Gaza.
This particular war that's going on.
The negotiations you alluded to in Paris this weekend between the heads of Mossad and the CIA and Egypt and Qatar, they are trying to achieve a 2-month ceasefire that would make it possible to free most of the 134 remaining Israeli hostages in the Gaza Strip. If they can stop the shooting for 2 months, it would be already a good thing, obviously. Sometimes if a ceasefire takes hold, it doesn't start up again. But this is contrary to everything that Netanyahu has been saying. He's said that this will go on for months or years. And certainly the opinion polls show that the majority of Israelis want the war on Gaza to continue. So I'm not optimistic that it will end completely. In a way, it's been going on since for decades and decades and decades, and basically it would be periods of relative peace, and then these flare-ups, these big assaults where Israel will go in and kill 1,000 or 2,000 people. But we've never seen it on this scale before.
Lara Marlowe, thank you very much for joining us.